Hello and welcome to the Kentucky Today podcast. I'm Lawrence Smith, the editor of Kentucky Today, alongside our managing editor, Mark Maynard, our content editor, Chip Hutchison, and now joining us on a regular basis, our life issues reporter, Tessa Redmond. Welcome, Tessa.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We thought this should be more than three grumpy old men talking about the news, so we wanted to add a touch of class to our program, so we're glad that you're here. Let's start with our top stories of the week, and I'll start because mine is the most recent, probably the State of the Union address last night. Not so much the content, but the decorum or lack of it. It was too long, I thought. First of all, 148 minutes, a record amount of time. When you start the speech after 9 o'clock, by the time you're over, most of your audience is gone, especially on the East Coast. But there were some good moments. You know, the men's hockey team being recognized, the goalie receiving the Medal of Freedom. There were some Medals of Honor awarded. There were the Purple Heart awarded as well. And I thought it was also very significant that the president highlighted Sage Blair. She's the young woman who was transitioning without the consent of her parents, her school keeping it a secret. Tragic story of gender confusion and the attempt to keep that from her parents. And Trump clearly stated the obvious that there are only two genders, a man and a woman, so I appreciated that. But what struck me most, and you guys can talk about this in a second, was the lack of decorum. First, more than 70 Democrats boycotted the speech, did not show up at all. And those that were there rarely applauded anything the president said. Many were heckling the president. And of course, President Trump also needled them right back. And Representative Al Green was escorted out again, as he was last year. It was a complete lack of civility. If you've ever watched, I don't know if you guys have ever watched the Prime Minister's address in Great Britain to the House of Commons, it looked like that. But we're not used to that. We're used to more decorum. So I'm hoping that in the future, our leaders pay more heed to passages like in James, where it talks about an unbridled tongue, the danger of that, and Luke, where it talks about how to treat our enemies. I don't know if we'll ever see that again, but I certainly hope that we do return to some kind of decorum, because last night was pretty embarrassing as far as highlighting the split in our Congress. Guys, give me your thoughts on that. Am I being a grumpy old man?
Well, as the youngest, I guess I'll jump in. I mean, I don't think so. I saw, exposing my age. I saw a reel the other day on social media that I thought was kind of relevant to this, and in it she said, we want the benefits of a Christian society without submission to Christ. And as believers, we can't be surprised that people who don't know Jesus are going to act like they don't know Jesus. And we just live in a time where Christian values are kind of on the way out, and I think that was really demonstrated during the State of the Union.
I, I think State of the Unions are different now, though, than they were, even, 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 12, certainly. I think social media has changed all that. I think State of the Unions used to be, where they talked about policy, where they talked about their agenda, that kind of thing. And now I think they don't need to do that as much because they are out there. They're on social media. Trump's on social media regularly. He's talking about his policy. He's talking about all that all the time. And it becomes more of a show. And certainly, he's, for better or worse, a showman. And I think sometimes for worse, I think, he, like you said, he wasn't holding back either. But we've seen similar things to this really in the last couple terms, really. Even with Biden, you had some Republicans who weren't acting very
Marjorie
nice
Taylor
too.
Greene famously shouted out,
Yeah. So, I mean, is that what we expect out of it now? I hope not. You would like to think we could have some class and then we could come together at least for a night while they're talking about these things. And some of the things they booed, you kind of wondered, or maybe not booed, but didn't react well to. You kind of makes you wonder as well. Really, what are we doing here? Why do we hate each other so much? And I don't think, certainly it, it, uh, it turns you off from watching it. And I agree with you, Lawrence. An hour and 48 minutes was a bit long.
And
I
Chip,
do appreciate that he didn't
Yeah.
start till after UK was finished, though.
Chip, Mark is right. These State of the Unions and speeches like this are really now little more than political theater.
Right. That's all it is. And it was embarrassing, quite honestly. Here we're supposed to be the most powerful, the greatest nation on the face of the earth, and to see the really childishness on behalf of so many people, that's troubling to me. I think of Romans 12:18, which is a verse I wish that the entire bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. would embrace. If it be possible, as much as depends on you, live at peace with all men. Now, we want to stand up for our convictions, but we want to do it in a kind but forceful manner. It's not calling people names. It's not trying to uh, belittle. That's what troubles me, the belittling of the other party, and to think that the State of the Union used to be a time where the president tried to bring everyone together. It's not that way anymore. I did, and I think it's important to notice that when President Trump talked about the Democrats' failure to be supportive of a ban on gender transitions without parental consent, he made a very, I think, relevant statement. Those people who have that view, he said, these people are crazy. Because, and I am appreciative that he certainly was strong. I made a strong statement on gender. There's male and there's female, and I am appreciative of that. I wish he had not resorted to some of the tactics he did. And some of the things he said obviously were not accurate. But again, sad state of affairs. We need someone who can come in to the political arena, not just the president, but others, and bring common sense. Don't vote according to the party, vote according to what is right.
Well, I think we're seeing the results to wrap this up of what happens when you make politics God. When you worship politics, that kind of response is going to happen because there is no unifying understanding of that there's a God above all of it. Mark, what are your top story? Is your top story or stories this week?
Yeah, I had a couple I thought that were very interesting. One came out of the Christian County Baptist Association. John Franklin is the AMS there, and he was talking to a pastor in his association, and they're a very successful association. They have only 2 open pulpits out of 41 churches, which that's great numbers, and we wish all associations were that full. Their pulpits were that full. But anyway, the pastor said, well, yeah, he's got a couple of guys who he'd like to see preach, and but there's no pulpits to fill there. He went to Fruit Hill, where Tim Morgan is the pastor, and Tim told him what he did was I started Sunday night services again, and that gave my guys an opportunity to preach. He had 4 guys in his church who wanted to be preachers, who were feeling that call. Well, the more he asked people in the association, the more every one of them was saying, well, we've got 2 or 3, we've got 4, so it ends up they had 25 men who are looking at, that call and trying to see if that's the call on their life. And they want to help them along. So he got with Jason Lowe, and Jason Lowe gave him the preaching handbooks. They got those together, and they had an introductory
He's the regional
meeting.
consultant.
Sorry, he's a regional consultant for the KBC, and he's they're in the 3rd print of that book, by the way. But anyway, they set up a meeting, just a meeting of interest, and they had 25 men show up. They had 9 pastors show up, and John. And they actually kind of had a little study right there and then. They started it, and these men are going to go every month, once a month, to learn how to become a preacher, to learn how to, to learn about how to explain the scripture, how to go about the whole thing about preaching. And they're going to give them opportunities to preach. And I was like, well, how are you going to do that? You don't have any, you don't have that many openings. And he said, well, we've got 8 different ways. And he's got eight ways he's going to have these guys come and preach at different places, nursing homes, whatever. And they also gave each of them a scripture passage and they're going to have to, the next time they meet, they have to preach 5 minutes on that passage. But anyway, they're so excited. The meeting was supposed to end at 8. It didn't end till 9:15 because everybody stayed around talking. They were so excited about it. And, I asked John, I said, what is going on there? And he said, well, he thinks it's strong churches, pastors in the pulpit talking about this, talking about the need, and the KBC and he mentioned this, the KBC has talked about, we need men to step out of the pews, and that men are ready to do that, calling out the called. And that's exactly what's happening in that association. And it's very exciting. It really is.
It is. And you did a story as well about another way that God is moving through, in this case, one young man.
Yeah, young man, Alec Rudy, and he's out of Paducah. He's a member of Lone Oak First Baptist Church, and he's also a student at UK. He's a junior at UK, and he goes to Emmanuel Baptist Church, and he's a student leader for their church at Emmanuel Baptist. And what he's doing is leading the charge on UK Pray. And basically what that is an initiative to pray for every person on UK's campus. That's 61,958 people. And he needed 1,500 people to pray for 40 different people over a 40-day span that started this past Tuesday, and it goes through Easter. And if you sign up for it, you get a prayer prompt, and there's different things you can pray for. Of course, you can, and mainly is their salvation. Because we don't know who's saved and who's not. I mean, we're talking everybody on campus. We're talking every student. We're talking every professor. You're talking Mark Pope. You're talking every athlete, every cleaning service person, everybody on that campus. And it's just real exciting. He was real excited about just the power of prayer. And we know prayer changes things. And, I know everybody might think, oh, that's crazy. That you could never do that. Well, you can. 1,500 people. And they commit to praying for 40 different people for 40 days. And you can reach 62,000 people with that. They can be covered in prayer. So I thought it was a very exciting thing that he's taken on. That's a big task.
Tess, I'm throwing this question to you. You're not quite ready for it, and if you can't answer it, that's fine. But I know you and your husband kind of lead youth in your church. Are you seeing something happening among young men?
Among young men, I don't know that I can fully speak to that right now. I know, a lot of our males are very young. They're in middle school, and they want a place to belong, and they need purpose, right? They have a drive to accomplish, to provide, to achieve. And ultimately, that's going to be found in submission to Christ. And so providing them a space where they can gather with one another and be trained up by other men is so huge, because when we make disciples, we see people like this young man at UK who is taking initiative to lead out in this area. And that's why local church ministry is so incredibly important, right? Because that's where disciples are formed. So then they can be sent out to do whatever it is that God calls them to do, whether it's on a college campus or a local association or a local school and even beyond.
Chip, your top story.
Lawrence,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just one more thing. I was just thinking about the people he has sat under, the pastors he sat under, Dan Summerlin, and now Ron Edmondson. And, those are two great ones, really. And I think that's helped Alec along the path, for sure.
They've made it their mission to disciple young men, so that's great. Chip, your top story.
My top story is Woodlawn Church in Paducah, Kentucky. A fire late Friday night caused extensive damage inside to that church, and the pastor there is Brad Henson. Now, Brad is a former Kentucky Baptist Convention pastor, now pastoring Woodlawn. And when the news of that fire came out, he had about 15 churches that reached out and said, hey, we'll provide space for your church to meet. So that was late Friday night. First Baptist Church Paducah is the church that he talked with. Brian Arnold is a pastor there, is good friends with Pastor Brad Henson. So they agreed to allow that congregation to meet, and they met at Paducah First Baptist Church 2 days later on Sunday morning. They have a congregation of about 150 people. It's very interesting, I think, that Paducah First Baptist at the same time on a Sunday morning, they were having their regular Sunday morning service. They were also having in another part of the building a Hispanic service, and then they were having the Woodlawn service. So just a great story of cooperation and being a good Samaritan, not just to a person but to a church. And it really is an encouraging story. Brian Arnold made a great statement that while this is not Woodlawn is not a KBC church, he said we've got to understand the body of Christ involves more than just people who are singing in a Baptist church.
Mm.
And I was really encouraged by that. And Brad Henson said, if this is going to happen to me in our church, I'd want it to be in Western Kentucky because people are so willing to lend a helping hand.
Great story. Thanks for that, Chip. Tessa, what about you?
Yeah, I've got two key ones, but my top one would have to be it's called Metaverse Missionaries, and it's from the IMB, and it tells a story about an IMB missionary who's stationed in Japan, who's exploring virtual reality, and is actually they're partnering with a church in Clearwater, Florida, to go on virtual reality mission trips, which is just incredible. And so they create these avatars. That are purposed to start conversations about the gospel. There was one individual from that church who his avatar was a skeleton with a life preserver to communicate the passage from Ephesians, which talks about, though he was dead in sin, he was rescued, and now he's called to be a lifeguard to tell others about the gospel. And it's just so interesting how they are leveraging um, this technological advancement to access people who maybe normally wouldn't hear the gospel in places that might be closed to open sharing of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I think what's really neat about it is it's not just staying online. They're not looking to replace the ministry of local churches or missionaries. And there's actually another trip planned in July where some of these church members and IMB missionaries, they're going to actually go to Tokyo. There's an annual convention that happens where people who explore and do whatever, I'm not an expert, but do whatever it is that happens in virtual reality, they meet up in person. And so there's going to be, Florida church members and IMB missionaries on the ground meeting up with these people, inviting them to coffee so they can talk about Jesus in person. And of course, those conversations have happened in the online sphere, but nothing replaces in-person discipleship. So I just think it's so interesting and encouraging in a world where so much is moving online. And that's a dark and scary place. But the Lord gives opportunities to redeem that and to be intentional. And it was just really encouraging to see the IMB and this local church take advantage of that to be faithful. And
Mark,
then second,
Chip makes an important point there. Tessa makes an important point there. The internet can be a dark place, but the Lord can certainly redeem it for His purposes. Especially the case for those of us who are older and tend not to readily adapt to new technology.
Yeah, we have to take advantage of that, and IMB is with this, and I think that is very encouraging to see. Really, you got to go where the people are, right? And a lot of them are online now, and they are doing this virtual reality thing, and they're doing those kind of things, and we got to meet them there.
Tess, you had another story as well.
I did. There's a House bill that has been passing through the General Assembly, and it's House Bill 227, and it's a child internet safety bill. And our Attorney General Russell Coleman just spoke out in support of that late last week, and it would require social media and AI companies to strengthen age verification and parental controls. And one of the key features is to ban features like infinite scrolling, where kids can just get on. And I mean, there's endless content on the internet, as we all know. So it prevent kids from being sucked into just really addiction, and also just seeing content that their brains are not, equipped to handle, and that they shouldn't be looking at. And I think that's such an important bill. I'm in my late 20s and I've fallen victim to infinite scrolling, and I'm encouraged that the General Assembly is taking internet safety seriously, because it really can impact a child's physical, mental, and spiritual health.
Indeed, and we should mention the Attorney General has already also filed a lawsuit against Roblox, which is popular among children and can have some stuff on it that children should not see. So we'll see where that bill goes. Another very important bill that's already passed the House is one that would make the act of grooming a child for sexual exploitation a crime. I talked to the sponsor of House Bill 4, Representative Marianne Proctor, a Republican from Boone County. Most Kentuckians, I think, would be surprised that this bill is even necessary. So talk about what this bill is about and why it's needed.
Well, you're right. Many people have found that this is surprising that we need. But what we have been finding over, the last couple of years or so is really that there is this predatory behavior where adults are engaging in these processes where they are grooming minors to prepare them for sexual abuse. So we don't really have anything in statute that captures this, but we know in every case, before somebody crosses that line, there has been this history of these inappropriate relationships that people have been developing where they're trying to gain the minor's trust and then manipulate that into, bad practices. So we're really this is the gap in the legislation that we're trying to address that.
So to clarify, this bill would make the act of grooming, the process of grooming, a crime aside from any other actual abuse that may take place.
Correct. So what we're trying to do is stop this behavior before it progresses to physical sexual abuse.
So how does the bill define grooming?
It defines as an adult who engages in a pattern of behaviors to entice, solicit, coerce, or induce a minor to prepare them for future sexual conduct. So we see that happening where the adults engage in this relationship where they're seeking to build trust, and then they manipulate that for their own purposes.
How did you become aware of this problem in the first place?
There's several very public cases that happened in Boone County. One is from one of my constituents who's actually a friend of mine. And this happened to her daughter in one of the schools in my district. So that's how I really became aware when she shared the details and what was happening. And then my law enforcement reached out to me saying, we really don't have anything that we can prosecute this guy because there is nothing that would criminalize the acts that he was doing, which were completely inappropriate.
You define what grooming means. Talk about what it does not mean. What are some of the exceptions that are part of this bill?
We have a lot of exceptions in there. Certainly any conversations that a physician would have with a child about appropriate levels of sexual issues. Same thing with schools. We're not eliminating anything in the health curricula. We're not eliminating these conversations with parents or their family members. And we've also put in there volunteers, people that are working as mentors or Sunday school teachers or things like that, that would be trying to help kids to have what are good, healthy relationships. So those people, those clearly are not what's being targeted in this, but there's certainly carve outs for that.
Now, is there any kind of mandatory reporting requirement? If someone suspects grooming, are they required to report that? And if so, to whom?
Well, that's already a statutory thing. We are a state, you're required to report. So that would be any kind of abuse. So we would certainly expect somebody to do that.
Is there a danger of someone maybe falsely reporting a grooming for whatever reason?
That was an initial concern that I had on this bill, but I think that we have had every stakeholder at the table, and we feel confident because this is an intent crime. It's going to be very difficult to prove. This is a high bar, and so then we really, you're relying on a whole system of our legal system. So the police would have to have probable cause. And then if there was enough there, it would go through the appropriate judges and juries. There's many, many steps that somebody who would be falsely accused would quickly be weeded out.
Mm-hmm. The bill passed the House 98-0, which is highly unusual. Congratulations. What does that tell you?
There's a lot of support for this bill. I really have had zero opposition, and we have so many groups and so many survivors that have been very outspoken in support of this bill. So I'm optimistic that it's going to go to the Senate, and I expect it will go through with the same amount of success.
You mentioned this, but what kind of response are you getting from the general public, especially from people who have been abused?
It's been heartbreaking. I've had people from across the Commonwealth reach out to me, and they haven't even told family members that, they maybe had this happen to them 10, 20, 30 years ago, and they're speaking about it for the first time. And what's been interesting is this bill has been out in public since last fall when we've been talking about it. But as more and more cases are coming up in more and more counties across the Commonwealth, it's leading to more and more stories where we're still talking about this. So I think some of the victims had told me that it gives them a step in their journey to recovery. It's given a lot of victims, and it's not just women, it's men as well. I think one of the most egregious cases that we had in Boone County that was recently prosecuted, where the man is now serving 15 years for what he did. It was to a young man. But I think for them, it gives them a voice, makes them seem that they're heard. This is something very difficult for our kids to report because they're confused by it. They don't really understand all the nuances. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of fear. So they're reluctant to do it. So we're hoping to give them a voice, teaching them how to recognize these patterns and walk away before we have significant emotional damage done to them.
Again, back to the bottom line, this is designed to help prevent this kind of abuse, right?
Correct. It's a tool in the toolbox for law enforcement to be able to prosecute this type of behavior.
Anything else that you want to add that we may not have mentioned?
I think it's important for people to realize there are two distinctions to this bill. The first part is if you're 18 and you engage in this behavior with somebody 14 or under, then it's a Class A misdemeanor. Where the bill increases in significance is when it's a position of special authority or trust, because that's where majority are coming from. And these are the people that we teach our children to trust. And so that's why it's a significant penalty. So in that case, if they're 18 or over, and in that special position of authority or trust, if they engage in this with any minor, it's a Class D felony. And if it's under 12, it's a Class C. That's how seriously we take this. It's a reprehensible crime, and we look to punish it as severely as possible.
Well, the Kentucky Baptist Convention has made it a priority to stop this kind of abuse in churches and to report it whenever we can, whenever it's found out. So this is certainly another tool that churches can use to stop this sort of thing from happening.
Yeah, I hope that you do, because we're finding that churches are not exempt. In this case that I'm talking about, Northern Kentucky, this was a worship leader that came from within the church, and it's very disappointing, and it's the effects of that are so significant. So it's not just isolated to schools, and we're not meaning to pick on just teachers, but really anybody. They're just the ones who are most contact with these young kids.
Good luck in the Senate. Nice talking to you.
Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Chip, you're a longtime churchman, former KBC president. I would think this is something that, as we begin to go to the end of our program, that all Kentucky Baptists can support.
I certainly would hope so. As we're in an era where anytime you hear someone has groomed someone with illicit purposes, we've got to guard against that. And so, guard against all appearance of evil. So certainly Kentucky Baptists should support this. We don't want horror stories, and this is certainly, I think, a way to hopefully prevent that. We know you cannot legislate morality, but we certainly can stand against immorality.
Mark, Tessa, any thoughts on this?
I was just going to say, I think it's important. I think this bill is important because grooming is not something that happens outside of sexual abuse. It is step one with the intent of pursuing that abuse. And so I think this bill, in making sure that there are protections for minors and there are penalties for adults who engage in this behavior, that's really important because grooming has a destination, and that's where it's headed. And so I think this bill is appropriate. And Chip, I agree. I think Kentucky Baptists can and should get behind this bill.
Yeah, I think it's something to if we can prevent anything like this from happening in any way, we need to do it. And this is a good step in that direction.
Well, thank you all. Enjoyed it. There are a couple of bills we should mention that were among many that we're keeping track of. House Bill 646, which criminalizes the distribution of both abortion drugs and end-of-life drugs, assisted suicide drugs. We're keeping an eye on that. And there's a bill just been filed, House Bill 714, which gives personhood rights to unborn children. So we'll be keeping track of that, particularly Tessa, who's our life issues reporter, will be keeping track of both those bills. Well, thanks for watching and for listening. Please tell others about KentuckyToday.com and give us a 5-star review on Apple. For more on the Kentucky Baptist Convention and the cooperative program that makes this program and many others possible, go to kybaptist.org. Lord willing, we'll see you next time on the Kentucky Today podcast.